I think they
both
do.
my parents were like, "Are you sure? Because you could save some money if you were staying home a little longer now." And I was like, "I'm out."
Yeah, it's gone now. Yeah.
So that was me being probably foolish. But it worked out. I had my first couple of places were, you know,
so nice. It wasn't your body. See the sun?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come out and like my eyes were like,
It's good though. You know, you find rent for $350 a night sharing space. You know, $350 a month. There might be something wrong with it. A night. No, $350 a night. That's probably bougie. You know. Yeah, for real. How's it going? I feel like I wake up every day and something new happens. Boy. What about you, man? What's new this week?
Just feel different. Feel like different from
they have, I always wanted to go south for just the environment. I just like it there.
Yeah.
And there's hot weather.
Yeah. Same. Can't blame you.
And there's a decent college down there, just working for us. So we'll go there, do something. And hopefully, it's just getting back and forth, but.
Yeah, that's hard.
I was looking at Garrett County. Garrett County, it was so far away that I was like, I'm not even making like 8 trips back and forth. So
Yeah.
that part, like even though it's only like a couple hours away, like it might as well.
No, it's just far enough that you don't want to do it.
Yeah, exactly. That you don't have to do it in a day.
For sure.
Yeah.
So I was just looking at other schools. I was like, maybe there'd be one in Miami that I could go to, and there was.
Nice.
And I mean,
Miami's not crazy to like fly back and forth. Like it's usually you can usually find good deals on like flights and stuff to come back.
Also,
you know, brush up on your culture and work on your Spanish.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was like, it wasn't in the Orthodox churches out here. Like the closest one was like an hour away.
Oh gosh.
It's not churches in Miami.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
There's like this.
It's very much like a culture. Like there's a lot of like it's very heavy cultural. Yeah.
Okay.
So like there's like a lot of different. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was looking at it the other day, and there's like this Russian cathedral which is at the beach, and they've got palm trees
Nice.
outside. I was like,
Amazing.
Would the Russians like move down there? So they're so tired of the
You wouldn't have to take one for the team sitting outside. Like, it doesn't matter. It's just nice outside. It's hot, but
There's no beach in Garrett County.
no.
I beg Ziffer. There's a beach in Garrett County. It's in McHenry.
Okay, that is not a beach.
That is a beach.
That's not an ocean beach. Yeah.
One of the Wednesdays when
That's really funny.
rock climbing gyms there, which is
Nice.
good for me. I also could pursue that.
Oh yeah.
Were you an Earth Treks guy? Were you an Earth Treks guy back in the day?
Back in the day.
Back in the day. How old is this kid?
No, but Earth Treks is no longer, right?
Oh,
No, I think our general thing is still over.
I think they changed
but not if I drop it.
Somebody else bought it.
Oh, maybe.
He doesn't like the change.
Did you know Earth Treks?
Like,
Earth
mix
Treks.
it up. So if I drop them off,
So
they
there's a
carry
climbing
them.
gym in Timonium, and there's one down in Columbus.
Oh,
And then
I know.
You just need a donation box. It kind of looks like
but yeah,
it has a spot with
I don't know who bought them out or
so that's kind of what I was thinking.
There's a candle box up there that we kind of. We're getting another.
They must have gotten bought out.
George is getting it. It'll be up soon. All right.
Moves. Making it happen.
Exactly.
Hey, I would download
Yeah, and like time frame too. Like when you want.
It's like
summer.
yeah. Is it like
Cornucopia.
overkill? Yeah, exactly.
There's a word for
Is it
you.
like overkill to have like 5 different kinds of bouquets and you can choose 5 different vibes, I guess? Because the lighting will change the vibe.
Yeah, but also like depending on
House
yeah,
lights.
but also it's just nice to have a picture of your work.
Do you have models?
This
Do you need to find models? You can find models.
It's just my friend.
How was your down by?
Yeah, exactly. Same here. I'm like, do you enjoy models? But I don't already
I was
have
down with
it.
your parents. You were
August, do you have a
Columbia?
suit? Do you have a suit?
Oh man.
He would be perfect.
You'd be a good model.
He's like diverse, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I like it.
A lot of people have thought that.
Oh, really?
Wait, do you,
It's
you know
figure.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she,
Did your parents find it?
Oh,
she
I
said,
can see it. She said she goes to model.
huh?
She goes to model.
Yeah, no, without my consent, she contacted a modeling agency, told them my name and number, and then they called
Did it work
me.
out for you?
No, they just called me in the middle of my English class, and I just kept on getting these random phone calls. I looked at my phone, and there was like a whole wall of text, like yada
We have
yada,
everything
modeling
here. We have
agency.
models, we have photographers.
Wow. Wow, maybe you should just stand up next to me and like maybe it'll make me look probably worse actually. Never mind.
He's not actually a model. I'm just trying to make him one. It's okay.
Oh, okay. All right, folks, we're going to get started. Tonight we are talking about marriage and ordination, two sacraments in the Orthodox Church, marriage and ordination. And actually they have a similar liturgical element where in the marriage you go around the table that's out in the nave. You go around it 3 times while these songs are being sung. And then during your ordination, well, during a priestly ordination, they go around the altar table 3 times, and the same songs are sung. So there's some connection between these mysteries, between these sacraments. So we're going to talk about them tonight. We're going to start with marriage. Marriage. I was asked a really great question the other day that I had never ever thought about before, and that was, so if marriage is a sacrament, do like 2 atheists who go down to the justice of the peace and get married, like are they really married? Would you say they're married? Or 2 Muslims, you know, who get married in a mosque in like Egypt, are they married? How do we understand this? And then really it gets confusing if somebody converts to Christianity, like, what's going on here? Actually, Paul addresses exactly this problem in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. He says, remain with your spouse and pray for them, and perhaps they will be saved through your labors. But marriage as a sacrament has its beginning in the Garden of Eden, right? It was ordained by God in the Garden of Eden, and we quote, "This is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh." You know, a man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife, right? And the 2 shall be made one flesh. And so this is God establishing already in the Garden of Eden marriage. It's just part of the order of the universe. And so it's ordained by God in a way that is kind of different than some of these other things that we have in the church, like, say, ordination, actually, or like unction, or one of these other sacraments that we looked at. This is a little bit different because it's already there in the garden. It's already there before Adam and Eve fall, right? So, and in fact, the practice of having marriages in the church really took a long time to develop. It was centuries and centuries and centuries. By about the 9th century, it was normal to get married in the church. That was pretty much the standard. But up until then, there were a lot of practices. And usually, the practice was, go get married by the Roman justice, and then come to church as a couple, and you'll be received as a couple, and people will understand, oh, these 2 people are going to go home together, and it's okay. Okay, so in the Orthodox Church, we also do not have necessarily a what's it called? A conjugal view of marriage. you're married even if you don't consummate the marriage through sexual intercourse, right? You're still married, because in the Orthodox Church, it's God who unites you to one another. And this happens over the course of the service. But if you don't go home and consummate the marriage, like who am I thinking of? John of Kronstadt in the 1900 or so. He this seems a little devious to me, to be honest. I don't recommend it for everybody, but he proposed, married the woman down there right after their marriage. He said, "So we're not going to be having sex." And they were celibate as a married couple, but we still see them as married. So let me read for you a beautiful, spicy quote from St. John Chrysostom when we commemorate tonight. How do they become one flesh? How do they become one flesh? As if she were gold, receiving the purest of gold. The woman receives the man's seed with rich pleasure, and within her it is nourished, cherished, and refined. It is mingled with her own substance, and she then returns it as a child. The child is a bridge connecting mother to father, so the three become one flesh, as when two cities divided by a river are joined by a bridge. And here that bridge is formed by from the substance of each. But suppose there is no child. Do they then remain two and not one? No. Their intercourse affects the joining of their bodies, and they are made one, just as when perfume is mixed with ointment. Okay? So there's this beautiful image of the union of man and woman happening in sex. But it doesn't necessarily always lead to a child. Nevertheless, it is unitive. There's a unitive element to that. So that's talking about sex within marriage. And I do want to kind of talk further about that. I just happen to have that quote right there. So there you go. The marriage itself is a picture of the relationship between Christ and the church, right? We read from Ephesians chapter 5, where Paul says, he concludes this passage by saying, "This is a great mystery, and I mean in reference to Christ and the church. However, he says, no man ever hates his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it as Christ does the church, because we are a member of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, and I mean in reference to Christ and the church. However, let each of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband." That's actually not the word respects, but we'll use that translation for today. So Christ left the Father. He came to the earth seeking his bride, right? That's the story of God seeking out his people. Christ leaving his Father, coming to earth, seeking out his bride and bringing her to himself, being united with her. That's what we all what is happening. We are being united with Christ, as is in the church. Okay? We are being filled with his life. I mean, some of these are very sexual images, right? And Paul is saying this little mystery of marriage between a man and a woman, it reveals something that is cosmic and greater than just this one thing. So because it is a sacrament, marriage, you typically don't have to worry about making an idol of your partner. Okay? If you think about things just in terms of discrete units of time, how much time you have here, how much time you have here, wow, I only spent 15 minutes in prayer and reading scripture this morning, and I spent probably 3 hours, gazing into the eyes of this beautiful woman who I want to marry, am I making an idol of her? You could worry about that. But because we see this mystery as helping us enter into the greater mystery, the cosmic mystery, gazing into the eyes of your beloved, which, sorry to tell you, but if you're not married, it's not going to happen like that for, a year into marriage. Gazing, into the eyes of your beloved is actually an avenue for becoming closer to God. That the mystery opens up into the greater mystery that it participates in. And so, yes, it is possible to make an idol of your partner, but usually you have some deep emotional wound that you're carrying with you, and that needs to be dealt with. Usually, just kind of typical people. We see the mystery of marriage as a means of communion with God through this person, but God is there in the mystery of marriage. In that passage, I just want to flag for you, in the passage where it talks about the mystery of Christ and the church. Earlier it says, as the church is subject to Christ, so let wives also be subject in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Not a very popular passage, but maybe people are kind of coming back around to it. It was definitely a passage like, do we have to read that? 20 years ago. Now it's like, yeah, let's read that. Like, let's embrace this, kind of in broader culture. But the idea here is that just as Christ came, left the Father, gave up his life there, humbled himself by coming to us, humbled himself even unto death on a cross. This is the image that the man is supposed to show forth, the one who sacrifices himself unto death. So really, men and women should just be worried about themselves. Man should not be worried about whether the woman is submitting to him. Okay? The man should be worried about whether he is humbling himself and sacrificing himself unto death, okay, for his wife. And it's probably better it's even more difficult if you don't actually die, right? Sometimes it's like, oh boy, it would be easier to sacrifice myself unto death. I wish there were like a war I could go off to. Instead, I'm stuck here with this witch and this war. Anyways, it can be very difficult. And marriage is the realm of your salvation very often. So this is what a man does. He needs to just be worried about himself. The woman, it says here, be subject, as the church is subject to Christ, so that wives be subject to everything to their husbands. What is the relationship of the church to Christ? Are we just kind of slavishly like, well, whatever you say, honey? No, we are, we want to have a relationship with God. We recognize that we are, that we have to humble ourselves in order to be in right relationship with him who humbled himself, right? If we want to be united with him, then that same humility that he has, we need to have when we come before him. And yes, as the church, it does look like obedience and this kind of thing. Taking something that somebody says and not really understanding it, but being as generous as possible in your interpretation and kind of trying to be gracious and move forward with the direction that this person, your husband, is kind of trying to lead things in, or encouraging your husband to actually step up and lead and not make you lead so much. These are, marriages are complicated. And the main thing is the wife is supposed to show forth the church. And so the church is beautiful. The church is diverse, and there are kind of a multitude of ways in which we serve God. And in serving God, we are made more ourselves, not less ourselves. And so that's what it should be in your marriage as well. If, like, your husband is grinding you into the earth and serving him is, then serving him may not be making you more of yourself. It might be some way in which God's purifying you, but you probably should talk to somebody. It might just be purely abusive. But probably probably it's the way in which God wants to transform you. And if we, men and women, just pay attention to ourselves and our growth in Christ, then usually a lot of these problems get resolved, okay? Unfortunately, I just have to say this. Unfortunately, you know, we've gone through different periods in kind of the evolution of the relationship between men and women and the sexes in society. And you know, there were periods where men were really did lord it over women, and there were periods in which and there are also situations in which men are completely abusive. I will say, to be honest, as a pastor, I see far more frequently the woman is the abuser in the relationship today. Maybe, and usually uses claims of abuse of the husband as a form of abuse. It's pretty twisted. But you probably know about all these things too. You're online. It's a strange world out there. But that's why it's important to be careful as you seek a mate, and it's why the norm is to marry a Christian. The requirement is to marry a Christian. The norm is to marry somebody in the church, right? Who you're both accountable to the same person. You go to the pastor and say, "My husband's doing this," and your husband goes to the same pastor and says, "My wife is doing this." You have some people you can go to. We have sponsors in the church. When you get baptized, you have sponsors, you have godparents. Well, same thing when you get married. You have sponsors. You've got people who are praying for you, people who are kind of around you and watching you. There's your support. If something bad does happen in your marriage, they come, you can go to them, right? Luke?
Are your marriage sponsors different than your baptismal sponsors?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. You oftentimes it's like a couple, and they're like the sponsor for this couple that's getting married, but it can also be two individuals. So yes. So we have all of these kind of supports in the church that sometimes people who are just out in the world, they don't have, and it can get really nasty. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason why we say, you know, marry another Christian, and especially marry within the church, is because we want to have the same picture of what marriage is. Marriage is union with Christ and with one another. You know, it's kind of that you've probably kind of seen that image, right? As you grow together, you also are growing upwards towards Christ, and you're growing closer to Christ as you're growing together. As you are dying to your passions, you know, all of those things that you think you have to have in order to be like a real human being, giving them up in order to live in your marriage, whether you're a man or you're a woman, you are becoming more of who you are meant to be. And you, in that process, you're also being united to your spouse. And so it's the way in which God has chosen to purify so many of us. Is monasticism better than marriage? Good question. If you read 1 Corinthians chapter 7, it kind of can sound like Paul is saying, it is well for a man not to touch a woman.
It's coming from Paul.
Yes, right. I just read something recently that thought maybe he was actually married. And there was kind of this strange, and it wasn't a completely heretical idea. Like sometimes people, it's like, oh yeah, Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene, that kind of thing. But Paul says, now, concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is well for a man not to touch a woman. People debate. Is he saying, concerning this, let me give you the answer. It's well for a man not to touch a woman. Or is he saying, concerning the things about you that you wrote about, that is, that it's well for a man not to touch a woman, let me talk about that. So it's ambiguous. And Paul actually, throughout all of 1 Corinthians, he's really shifty. It's quite a rhetorical marvel, that 1 Corinthians, the whole thing. But there is kind of this question of, well, isn't it better to not marry and to serve the Lord? Aren't you getting married just because you're burning with lust? Isn't that it? And in fact, when we finish our when we have the ending of our marriage service, it says it's almost like trying to find an excuse for why like marriage is okay. It's like, well, okay, we know that Jesus went to a marriage, therefore marriage must be okay. The end. It's kind of uninspiring, honestly. The end of it, the beginning and middle are just overwhelming and beautiful. But I always kind of like just chuckle at the end of the marriage service. It's like they didn't know how to end, and they're just kind of like rambling on and saying a little bit about what they truly think. But anyways, but no, actually, marriage and monasticism are both important ways of being purified of our passions. And actually, I know monks who have far fewer opportunities to be purified of their passions because, you know, maybe they only live with one other monk, and actually they live in a house, and there are monks who live in houses, and they all have like their own room. Then they have to get like video games, like monks with video games. What is this? And you like a bunch of guys. It's like a dorm room. I know, but with prayer. And I think to myself, like, I mean, we married people have to struggle a lot with one another. You guys can just go up in your room and play your video games. So, anyways, I'm very critical. Then there are other when monasticism is done right, you know, especially in sometimes in hermetic monasticism where you're just going all alone out into the desert. Boy, it's lonely, and you have stories of like Saint Anthony really struggling out there. Okay, he's being purified of his passions. But you also have Cenobitic monasticism, where you're in a community, right? And you rub each other the wrong way. There are arguments all the time. Like, it is not smooth sailing in a monastery, and that is on purpose. You're praying, you're working with one another, you're tired, you're mad at one another, but you're stuck with one another. Like, it really is kind of like a marriage. And so these are both real ways to be purified of our passions and to be united with God, right? Through either the mystery of marriage or through entering more deeply into prayer and kind of this purification of the passions that's possible in monasticism, that's not possible in marriage. You just have a number of responsibilities. Usually you're working in the world. You certainly have responsibilities to your spouse in ways that monks don't. And so you can't necessarily like say, oh, just honey, I'm just going to be downstairs praying, a 17-hour vigil, and I know I'm going to be tired in the morning, but good luck with the kids. You can't do that. You're maybe you are doing vigils in the middle of the night. I'm doing vigils in the middle of the night with my baby. She's just up in the middle of the night all the time. But it's not exactly prayerful, unfortunately. I wish it were. So we often speak about marriage as being eternal in the Orthodox Church. This is very complicated. Marriage is eternal, but you can also have 3 marriages in the Orthodox Church. So are you like eternally married to 3 people? How does this work? The reason why we have this idea of the eternality of marriage, and I guess this is one of these things that kind of you just have to kind of hold in tension, and it does not really always logically fit with other ideas. In the marriage service, it says about the couple, bless their goings out and their comings in, replenish their life with good things, receive their crowns into thy kingdom, preserving them spotless, blameless, and without reproach unto ages of ages. Amen. So there's actually 2 parts of the marriage service. The exchange of the rings, and that's the betrothal service, is the first part. And then the second part is the crowning. The reason why we have crowns in the Orthodox marriage service is because crowns kind of represent a number of things. First of all, a crown is Stephanos. Stephanos should remind you of the first martyr, right? Stephen. And so there's just something in the crown itself and the name that reminds us of martyrdom. And so so there's that. We also have this story of the 40 martyrs of Sebaste, in which they're freezing in this lake, and this guy on the shore sees these 40 crowns coming down from heaven, and so there's something where the martyr is connected with the crown. Here, marriage as martyrdom, right? But not just as dying to yourself, but as witnessing, and that's actually what that word martyr means, is witnessing to Christ, the bridegroom, and the church. You're witnessing to this. So you get crowned, and it says, "Receive their crowns into thy kingdom." So it's saying, may their marriage be eternal in some way. Of course, this does conflict with something Jesus says, right? Where he says, "In heaven there'll be neither giving nor taking in marriage," right? In answer to the Sadducees who were trying to trap him about, actually the question is really, is there a resurrection? And they're like, we got a clincher. There's no resurrection because, you can have a woman who's married 7 times, and in heaven you wouldn't know who she's married to, therefore there's no resurrection. And Jesus is saying, just cut it out. We don't have, we're not going to, there's no like getting married in heaven. Like, I'm not going to even address this question. But what I tend to think of is that there is some sense in which marriage is just a shadow of the relationship that we all will have as the body of Christ. And so there may be some real way in which you're eternally married, but there's actually a union that everyone being united with God shares in as well. So I don't know what the answer is to this, but that is all out there. Marriage must take place in an Orthodox church. I'm saying a lot of these things just so y'all know, and don't go do this. I had somebody, a convert to Orthodoxy. His mother was a convert to Orthodoxy. He died. His mother cremated him, and I couldn't give him a funeral. So we can't do funerals for cremations. They didn't know that. So I'm trying to cover all these things for you, okay? You can't just go get married outside the Orthodox Church. That creates like problems for trying to bring that marriage into the church if you're already Orthodox. Okay, if you're not Orthodox and you already got married outside the church, or you're kind of thinking about becoming Orthodox, but you get married outside the church, no problem. We can bring your marriage into the church. It's just if you are part of the church, you can't go somewhere else for a sacrament. That's what we're saying. If you're part of the Orthodox Church, you don't go down to the register of wills or wherever you go to get to do your marriage. Okay, it's a sacrament, and so you need to be doing it in the church. August.
If you had like someone who was like Orthodox and like an Anglican or something, does the Anglican have to convert, or can he or she remain?
It is required that you marry a Christian. You can't marry a Muslim. You can't marry a Jew if you're Orthodox Christian. You can't marry a Muslim. You can't marry a Jew. You can't marry a Buddhist. You can't marry just some secular person who's kind of like, I pray a little bit, don't really believe in much, and never was baptized. You can't marry them, actually. You we have a understanding that marriage is bringing us closer to God as well as to one another, and it is bigger than just kind of the two people who love one another. So you do have to marry a Christian, but they don't have to become Orthodox. Okay, if you're Orthodox. If you want to then go on and be a priest, though, or even a deacon, that person would have to convert to Orthodoxy in order to make you eligible for ordination. But just in terms of like marriage, no. And there are many people who have marriages to people, and there's people in this church who have marriages to people who are not Orthodox. And oftentimes they make it work. It can work especially well, if the person is usually just coming to church here. Sometimes that happens. We had one couple. She was involved in this other church, and he was a catechumen here for the longest time, and then finally was received. And they thought they were just going to kind of go go together to this church twice a month, go together to that church once a month, whatever. They had it figured out so that he would only miss here once a month, she would only miss there once a month, but they do together twice a month. And they did that for many, many years, and eventually, though, she finally said, "You know what? I want to be Orthodox," and became Orthodox. So, but that's not required.
How is Christian necessarily defined? Like
Usually by baptism.
the baptism?
Yeah, it gets sticky. You know, you got somebody who got baptized, they were Catholic, and then they fell away, and they're like, yeah, I can. If you want me to tell the priest I believe in Jesus, I will. So it does get a little bit complicated. And then sometimes you have somebody who's never been baptized, but they're actually far further along in the life of faith, but they've never been baptized, and we couldn't marry you to them. So sometimes they do get baptized in order to be able to marry an Orthodox Christian, maybe like at a Protestant church or something, if they're not ready to become Orthodox.
And we're still holding to like the Mormons are Christians type.
I do need to confirm this, but yes, that Mormons, their faith is beyond the bounds of the Christian faith. Is typically how we. Sorry.
Witnesses.
Sorry.
Jehovah's Witness.
Same with Jehovah's Witnesses. Yeah, I mean they're just Arians,
Yeah.
but so they don't believe Jesus is God. So we'd say nope, that's not a faith. Although we did receive Arians at one time through their baptism. Anyway, is second marriage a sinful condition? Okay, this is interesting. So then you for some reason you get your marriage, it just falls apart and you get a divorce. Okay, it's initiated by another person. Maybe you initiated it, and you get a divorce. I pray that never happens for any of you because it's just a terrible thing. And there are many things that you can do to keep that from happening. There are way more divorces that happen than should. It's just people lack real perseverance and grit, and devotion to something that is painful and like they have to struggle with. And like, I'm not getting fulfilled. I'm out of here. I've got kind of reasons why I could kind of say that this is a bad marriage, and so I'm out of here. But there are conditions in which the divorce is just kind of, it's just a fact. So then you want to get married again, and so it's actually not, in the eyes of the church, your divorce isn't actually completely a real thing. They say, God united you guys. You're going to try and like sever the union. Okay, you can go to the courthouse and get your marriage, make it so that it says that it's no longer. But there is still some way in which you are united to one another, and it's only when you get married a second time that the church says, okay, well, there's no marrying that other person. There's no reconciling or getting back together with that first person. You married a second person, so that one is over. Okay? So it's really only with the second marriage that the first marriage is declared done. And so with the second marriage is penitential because it's the moment at which the first marriage is completely done. It's not the signing of the paper. It's the second marriage. And so the second marriage is penitential in the Orthodox Church. The betrothal part has you don't read these nice happy psalms. You read Psalm 50. Have mercy on me, Lord. Have mercy on you. Have mercy on me, O God, according to thy great mercy. Thy tender mercies blot out my transgressions. It's all penitential. The second part, the crowning, it is the norm. It aside from I think one prayer being taken out, it's the normal thing. So it's the marriage itself is understood as a real marriage, and it's not like a sinful condition that we're just allowing you in. But it's like it shows forth the mystery of Christ and His church. But there is something that is also recognized in that needs to be repented of in the early part of that service. The Orthodox Church does have annulments, but there's just a few of them. It's like if you accidentally marry your sister, it's like, oh no, that wasn't an actual marriage. That's just annulled. But the cases in which your marriage will be annulled are just so very patently obvious that we would say, no, that never ever was even a marriage. It's not like you need to get a divorce; it just never was a marriage. So, I mean, honestly, gay marriage would fall under that category. We'd say, you know, it doesn't fall within the category of marriage. Sometimes it is very complicated. Somebody, I knew a woman who was married to another woman. She actually grew up Orthodox, kind of fell away from the faith, married another woman. They lived together for like 40 years. And then in their old age, she kind of started to look back on her life and say, I think I really went wrong. And she came back to the church and she repented and, trying to figure out, they had adopted kids, trying to figure out what do you do with the trail here, the 40 years of how you lived. Like you can repent and you can kind of not engage in certain behaviors anymore, but there's still kind of this whole morass that you have to deal with, right? And it gets really complicated. We fast from conjugal relations before communion. Okay? So, from like Saturday night. You better do it before Vespers. From Saturday night, like around Vespers, through communion on Sunday. So we fast from midnight from food, but usually conjugal relations. Sometimes people will do a fast from sex for like 3 days before receiving communion. That's not typically what the Antiochian Church requires of you, but I'm just putting that out there that there are groups who say, just like the children of Israel before they sent Moses up the mountain had to fast for 3 days, we should fast for 3 days from sex and also from certain foods and so on. But that's not typically the way the Antiochian Church requires it. Yes, Ryan.
Is there like fasting for sex on other types of fasts as well, or is it just for communion?
Oh, yes. Thank you. The ideal is, fasting from sex like during Lent. If somebody gets married in like February, they get married on Valentine's Day, and then Lent starts. Lent starts like March 1st. I counsel it. I say, do not fast from sex. Like, this is a very important thing. I mean, do fast from sex before you receive communion, but I think you can probably do that. Don't try and go 49 days or whatever it is of Lent before Easter, Pascha, without having sex, especially like you just got married. It's not healthy, okay? So, but as you as you were growing in your marriage, it's like a goal. It's not like a requirement. It's like, oh, I wonder if we could do this. Let's try. Oops, we failed. It is something that you grow into rather than something that is like a hard and fast imposed kind of thing. It's supposed to be for your salvation, right? The fasting during Lent. The fasting before communion, it's less about your salvation. It's more about like preparing yourself to receive a great mystery, Okay, and I mean, we fast from food, we think food is good. And so fasting from sex doesn't mean that sex is wrong or something like that. It's just, we're fasting from good things because we're going to receive the thing that is what makes everything good. And so we are kind of, we're preparing ourselves in that way. So it's a different spirit. The spirit of fasting during Lent is more like purifying ourselves of our passions, and that's not appropriate in the first year of marriage. Okay, now quickly I want to talk about ordination for the last 15 minutes. Early on, you had to be you had to be the husband of one wife to get married. You couldn't be in your second, or to get ordained. You couldn't be in your second marriage or anything like that. Couldn't have two wives. Typically, what this means is consecutive wives. By the way, there wasn't typically polygamy in the time of the Roman period. Of course, there was in the time of the patriarchs. Jacob. But typically, when we hear husband of one wife, that means you didn't have a previous marriage. And that is how it gets understood. That's how it's understood, at least 300 years later, by Basil and this kind of thing. He's talking about bigamists and trigamists. These are not people who have three wives right now. They are people who have had three wives. So we did change. We now our bishops are celibate, right? Our priests do not have to be celibate, but our bishops do have to be celibate. And this changed in around the Council of Trullo in the end of the 7th century. And what happened was there were kind of these different practices, and the council said, look, we're going to just adopt this practice in which bishops are not married, just for consistency's sake, and that stood. Because basically, there was this one area in which the bishops were all married, but then most of the other areas the bishops weren't married, and so they said for consistency we'll establish it this way. Augustine.
This is kind of a hypothetical question, but in countries which still practice polygamy, like I think some Muslim countries still practice it.
Oh yeah.
If someone were to convert to Orthodoxy, do they just tell them like to pick one, or?
It's a great question, and actually I don't know. I don't think so. I think you would keep both your wives, but I don't know.
I've heard that too as well. Maybe
Yeah.
we just keep both of them, but I don't know.
Yeah, I can't. Like trying to pick one seems cruel.
Especially if you have kids.
That's right, and
it's like, what do you do?
that's right. That's right. So I will say you're not allowed to have 4 marriages. So you can have 3 marriages, but if you want to have a 4th, the church says nope. You cannot have a 4th. You failed at the 3, and you need to stay away from marriage. The problem might be with you, not
Isn't
the
it
other one.
that like you had 3 that I don't think this would happen, but like all of them died, like you were widowed 3 times.
Well,
You
and that
can't
can
get married
happen.
the first time?
That can happen,
I mean,
right?
it can, yeah, it's
Yep.
a possibility, but
It gets really complicated.
Yeah.
And you could have those situations. I think hopefully the person would be old enough that they wouldn't need to get married by that point. Paul does have to deal with young widows, though, and he says remarry them. In Russia, when you're ordained, whatever state you're in, you have to stay in that state, marriage state. So if you're not married, you get ordained to the diaconate, and actually to the subdiaconate. Then you're not supposed to. Then you can't be. If you're not married, then you can't get married. Just marriage is out for you now. If you are married and you're ordained and your wife dies, too bad. So you can't remarry and stay a priest. You can remarry and they'll make you a layperson. And there's a great guy who's a great priest, great man. He did that, and he works, I think, outside Cleveland for a ministry for men out of prison. So but he remarried because he had young children. In Russia, what they often would do is let the guy remarry and send him to Siberia, so that like everybody would think that was his first wife, and that I know. You know, you kind of figure out all these ways around the rules, right? But the question is, why do you have the rule in the first place? Okay, so yes, sometimes it seems a little bit ridiculous, like practically, come on. But why do you have the rule in the first place? It's because of what this is imaging. What your marriage is imaging, the love of Christ for the church. And Jesus doesn't like go around and say, oh, that woman didn't work out, I'm going to get another one. Or that woman died, I don't have to be faithful to her anymore. Jesus is faithful to his bride. And so the priest ought to be showing forth that faithfulness to his bride. And so that's the ideal, right? And then you have practicalities. There was a time when people would put away their wives because they wanted to become a bishop. And it says, let him be excommunicated who does that. One of the canons. All right. The reason why we have ordination, like that word ordination has in it order, right? It keeps order in the church. It would be great if, like, democracy worked as a governing structure. It actually doesn't work. Because what happens is, you know, it's like everybody's like, oh, we're all equal, we all govern. And then you have people who are a little more equal than others, and they're just a little better at like working the system or rising to the top, and people get in their positions because of their movements, right? They were able to persuade the crowd. They were able to pull the strings. And then, you know, because you always have to have somebody who's leading. You can't just like everybody sit in a room together and like, what are we going to do? Like some leader rises up, and we are relieved when a leader rises up. Like finally, like great, okay, this person's going to give order to our assembly here, and hopefully they're a good leader, and they're going to listen and like help us kind of like decide what we all want, and invite constructive criticism and feedback and so on. But like you have like it's baked into the structure of the world. To have orders and have leaders. And so the church just recognizes this. All of society used to recognize this, right? But we recognize that like there's kind of there's layers of leadership as well. So so you have bishops, you've got presbyters, and you've got deacons. These are the three main orders, and the deacons are typically known for serving. You know, the apostles were teaching. They were getting distracted with like serving tables, and things were happening at the tables, and people were like throwing pitchers of beer at one another. And so the apostles were like, we need somebody to help establish order here, but we can't do it because we have other things we need to do. So they ordained the deacons, right? St. Stephen and the seven with him. So the deacons were serving. The bishops or the apostles were preaching and teaching, and that's exactly what bishop, the kind of like the charism, the spirit, the role of the bishop is to kind of be the keeper of the faith. You are the rule of faith. The hierarchs in the church are, and they all of what we believe is kind of contained in them. And so if you're in communion with a bishop, and that bishop is in communion with another bishop, there's a kind of a union of faith and union of belief that is understood. Presbyters, that word just means like old man, presbyter. I'm a presbyter, even though I'm not an old man. They offer. They are basically the hands and the extension of the bishops. Because it used to be that you would have one bishop in one town. Well, that's actually the canon, one bishop in one town. But everybody would go to the bishop's church, and he was there, and he would be able to preside. But then as you have more churches in a town, you still only have one bishop there, but then you need priests. You need presbyters who are out there presiding over the offering and kind of being the extension of the bishops. And so that's what happens. We do have minor orders. We've got readers and subdeacons. The subdeacons, you see them on Sundays. They are helping in the altar. They are, when the bishop comes, they're really driving him around and assisting him. You've got readers. Peter Dillon is the chanter here. He's not actually a tonsured reader, as they say, but oftentimes you would tonsure your chanter, a reader, your head chanter. On the altar, we have a cloth. And so in the church, got a cloth. It's called the antimencium. And I open it up and put the chalice and the discos on it, and we serve communion on this cloth. This cloth has the bishop's signature on it, actually the metropolitan. For us as the Antiochians, Metropolitan Saba actually is our primary bishop. Bishop Thomas is just an auxiliary bishop, so he's like the bishop that Metropolitan Saba sent to do his bidding. So he really just works for Metropolitan Saba. Metropolitan Saba in the Antiochian Church in North America he's our one bishop, and so his name is on the antimencium. I can't serve a liturgy if I don't have an antimencium with his name on it. That and my ordination gives me the authority to serve a liturgy, but otherwise I wouldn't be able to serve a liturgy. Man, there's a lot on ordination that I'm just glossing over. So I guess the only other thing I'll say is you've got the patriarch, metropolitan, archbishop, diocesan bishop, auxiliary bishop. These actually are all just one order. They're all just bishops. And they've got different ranks, like gold stars or whatever, like generals, right? But it's all just, so the highest bishop is a patriarch. He's really just a bishop, okay?
I have a question, Father.
Yes, Allie.
Why do we not hear more about our patriarch?
Like in church?
Yeah.
In some churches, you have to commemorate the patriarch at every liturgy. In this church, in the Antiochian church, you only commemorate the metropolitan. When the metropolitan is here, then he commemorates the patriarch. So that's just the practice of the Antiochian church, like worldwide. And so it does mean that we don't hear Patriarch John in the liturgy at all, as opposed to like a Russian church where you would hear Patriarch Kirill, and with lots of honorific titles right before it. So he does send out things, and sometimes the archdiocese will kind of publish them.
So there is give and take. I mean, there is.
Yeah, the patriarch is part of a synod. He is the first among equals in the synod. The synod is made up of all the metropolitans of the Antiochian archdiocese worldwide. So there's like, I don't know, maybe 20 or so bishops, metropolitans who are part of the synod. And they, like if Patriarch John just died, that synod from among themselves would elect a person to be the new patriarch. And actually that's how Patriarch John, he was elected from among them. He was actually one of the youngest members, or the least. He served for the least amount of time, and he was elected. So, but there's a collegiality. If you want to do something, the patriarch can call the synod together, or but there is
mostly where he's active is with the synod.
Yes, that's right. So, and they meet usually once a year or so. Sometimes there are special things that he has to oversee, like when we had a metropolitan who needed to be deposed. He oversaw that whole thing. And two things. Why don't we have women priests? There's not a great answer for you, okay? The answer is Jesus laid his hand on 12 men and ordained them, and so we just keep up the pattern. It's not because men are better than women. It's not because men are better teachers and more knowledgeable than women. That's not true. My mother-in-law is a very good teacher. She's much better than I am. She's far more knowledgeable about the Bible than I am. It's not because men are better than women. It's but God has given this charism to men, and we just keep on the pattern. So I'm sure more could be said about that. One last thing, practical, to leave you with. Don't shake hands with a bishop. Don't tell him, God bless you. He will bless you. Okay, there's an order of things. I know it's like can sound stuffy, but sometimes it's just helpful to know what the order of things is. And you go up to him, you ask him for a blessing, and he blesses you and puts his hand in your hand, and you kiss his hand. That's the typical way of doing it. You wouldn't go up and just shake his hand. Hey, Bishop. Hello, sir. Don't call him sir. Even though it's a term of respect, it comes off poorly because there's a better term in Arabic and in Slavonic, actually, that means it's called Sayyidna. You say Sayyidna. Sometimes you could say Your Grace, Your Grace, Your Eminence, if it's Metropolitan Saba. But Sayyidna is like it's a familiar kind of way of saying our master, even though you're saying like ton despotin, you despot. You're saying, but it's like a familiar kind of like colloquial way. Vladika, if it's Slavonic, it's Vladika. Oh, Vladika, your blessing, that kind of thing. So just rules of the road. August.
Can patriarchs ever step down from their position if they want to?
Like the Pope, step down,
Sure.
right? I'm sure they could. Yeah, I'm sure there's something in the history where they have. Usually they die in office, though. Yeah,
And-
Ryan.
Oh,
Sorry. Go ahead.
Can bishops ever leave their office, or are they just kind of stuck there, whether they like it or not?
No, they can, and sometimes they are retired, and sometimes they. So actually, in Wichita, there's a bishop there who he asked to be retired, and he is retired now, but he still attends the church where that was his cathedral. It's not his cathedral anymore. He doesn't even come out and bless the people. Like they act like he's just a dude. I mean, of course, people are respectful to him, but things changed significantly after he retired. So yes, you can retire.
And are bishops ever referred to as father, or is it only the?
It really is only the priest. There is a sense in which they are the father, but usually we have some kind of special term for them. All right, Ryan, then Tom.
I guess my question is, what do we do when a metropolitan or a patriarch is a heretic?
It is really difficult. Okay, it's really difficult when your metropolitan is a heretic because you're passing judgment on your bishop, metropolitan, patriarch, and there's a real sense in which your obedience is your salvation. But yes, there does come a point maybe where they're a heretic, and this happened in the history of the church where Patriarch of Constantinople went from being an Arian or a Nestorian. Well, Nestorius was the patriarch, Constantinople. So this definitely happens. Like, how do you live faithfully? I mean, St. Athanasius was deposed several times because he wouldn't stop preaching the true faith. Then he was reinstated, then he was deposed, then he was reinstated, deposed, as part of what makes him a saint. But at the same time, you really need to struggle with your patriarchs. Like I see people struggling with Pope Francis, and I think there's something honorable there. I know it can seem like really like, oh my goodness, you're bending over backwards to make good sense of what he's saying when it's so patently like ridiculous. But I respect people who really are making an effort, because there is something about this relationship that we have with authority that we're not great at. We love to be the main authority and to look at truth and say the domain of truth is my domain, and I have just as much claim on it as anyone else. There's some truth to that, right? But we definitely we have an unhealthy relationship with, like, I'm going to get out there and I'm going to be the John the Baptist. I'm going to be the lone voice crying in the wilderness. I'm going to tell everybody how wrong everything is. That is not the path of salvation, unless, like, God has touched you from the womb, okay, like John the Baptist, to be that. Otherwise, like, you're probably going to be falling into the sin of pride and prelist, like delusion about who you are. So you really need to be very careful. But there are times to say, we're not going to do that. Usually what you do is you find some way around it, like just kind of like reinterpreting things. Like, well, I think he meant this, or whatever. All right, Tom.
Oh, I was just going to ask, is there any such thing as like a lifelong vow of celibacy? Like, do the bishops have that? Also, does that apply to like monastics as well? So like that bishop in Israel, like, can he go get married?
No, he can't go get married.
Like, that's for life.
Yes,
Okay.
and he's a bishop for life, even though he's a retired bishop.
Okay.
He just in the services doesn't get any of the honors, like any recognition in the services. But when you go see him, he blesses you like a bishop. He's celibate, like a bishop. He actually is a monastic too, and it is ideal if your bishop comes from the rank of monastics. But sometimes it's just a guy who wasn't able to get married, like because nobody wanted to marry him. So that happens too, right? But it really ideally is that it's somebody who's chosen from a monastery. But yes, you're celibate for life. I mean, unless you defect and you just say, I'm done with monasticism and I'm going to be a guy on the street, then well, yeah, okay. But you're not a monk anymore, and same you're not a bishop anymore. All right, last question. I got to let everybody go. But I will be here for more questions. Go ahead.
Oh no, I've forgotten it now.
All right, ask it to me when it comes to your mind. Thank you, everybody. I wish I had more time to speak about this, but thank you. God bless you all.